Thank you for joining another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Today's episode is called Beyond Spare Parts. In this episode, I have the great pleasure of meeting in a virtual form one of the great catalysts for the movie Spare Parts. Our guest today is Fredi Lajvardi, who is currently the VP of STEM Initiatives at Si Se Puede Foundation since 2018. He was a STEM educator for over 28 years in Arizona. He is one of the teachers who helped a team of minority students from high school reach a dream by beating Ivy League colleges. Yes, you heard correct. High school student versus college students. I had a great conversation with Fredi about many things. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Today I have the wonderful honor and opportunity. If you've seen the movie or read the book, and it's called Spare Parts with George Lopez, you probably know about that. And this is the real live person that this movie is actually talking about and focusing as far as the teacher goes. His name is Fredi Lajvardi. He's a STEM educator at Carl Hayden High School in Arizona. He's been doing that for over 28 years. He's a mentor at large and vice president of STEM initiatives at the Si Se Puede Foundation since 2018. He has been featured in images as Dream Big for the IMAX Theater, book and movie called Spare Parts, and the documentary for Underwater Dreams. Welcome, Fredi Lajvardi, to Success Innovation. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Thank you for being here with me and the audience for Success Innovation. Thank you so much. So, can you tell me a little bit about who you are, your early beginnings, where you were born, and a little bit about your childhood and how you jumped into being an educator?
Okay, well, I was born in Tehran, Iran, and my parents moved here when I was about a year old, and grew up in the United States and went to the American public education system, and recognized when I was going through school that I liked science and technology. And my high school career, I basically was entering and competing in science fairs. I was building hovercraft, first little models that would operate on the table, but eventually I had them large enough for me to ride in and travel across the basketball court at school. So with that, I ended up getting a scholarship to Arizona State University. I changed my major several times. I was going in for some type of thing like solar engineering, sports medicine, and then I ended up settling on teaching. And I came around to that because I kept visiting my teacher that used to help me run or compete in the science fair programs. And she kept asking me why I wasn't pursuing an education degree, because she thought that I would make a good teacher, because she said I was able to convince people to do things they didn't think they could do. So eventually I broke down and listened to her, and went and got my education degree. And then I started working in the public school system. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
Right. Awesome. So you started, and I heard you talking a couple of days back at Bakersfield College, and you mentioned that initially it was a little hard and it became frustrating as a young teacher going in with all the expectations. I'm going to take on the world. I'm going to change everybody. Whoever is my student is going to be the best student who I'm going to nurture and change and mold. But then you get into the school system. Carl Hayden, I'm assuming this is the school that you started, or maybe some other school, but things drastically get real for you because there's the red tape, there's the school district situation and what they allow you to do and not to do, as well as the funding that goes into the classes. So there was a point, from what I heard in that conversation, that you started getting frustrated. So what actually happened there, and how did that get turned around?
So when I was, like you said, just out of the Arizona State University, my education degree, I thought I was go out there and change the world. And right away, I started noticing obstacles that were making that difficult. You had the school curriculum that you had to follow. You weren't allowed to really deviate too much from that, because you were also being evaluated. And then there were, the regular school red tape as far as trying to do anything, I guess, extraordinary other than just what's going on in the classroom.
Hmm.
And so trying to get anything extra in there was real difficult. So I realized right away that I was getting disenfranchised with education. And if I was going to stay in it, I had to find a way to enjoy it, because I figure if I enjoy it and can share that with the kids, they'll enjoy it. And then, we'll both be able to do science and technology type stuff and have fun at the same time. And learning will happen much more comfortably. And I'd be able to stay in the profession and not, start to look for something else. So the only thing that came to mind was to start doing activities after school, because there were a lot less regulations. They didn't really provide any funding. You had to pretty much go out and find your own funding. But as far as what you wanted to do, if the kids and I decided we want to do a science fair, there was no one to say you couldn't do it. And as long as you could find a way to make stuff happen, you were able to do it. So that was what I started finding as far as a way to connect with the kids, because I felt like I needed to be able to spend time playing with science and technology with the kids, because I had to take it out of the realm of this is something you have to learn and it's going to come out of a book and it's very dry and you have to listen to a lecture and then take notes and then have a test on it. I wanted to show them how it was more directly related to them and their lives, and how they can use it to maybe make a career in that. But if not, at least give them a better understanding of the world and how things work in it.
So you mentioned trying to keep the students engaged. And if anybody's watched the movie, there's a scene right there where the teacher says, "Hey, why isn't anybody cracking a book open?" And
Mm-hmm.
they focus and they pan over to a student who says, "Well, they're right there." And they pan over and it's locked. And he says, "Why are they locked?" Because they don't want them to steal them. So, it's a funny moment, but it's a very poignant moment to me, because I do have recollections from conversations with other students and this is over in the LA area, where they actually do lock up and they have metal detectors for students to actually walk through. So it's not a too far-fetched idea. So when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that could possibly be true. Was this something that you were going through, that we talk about the budget, that people are concerned about books and materials and you can only check out certain things and whatnot? How did you manage to keep students engaged and to actually say, you students have spent about 6 or 7 hours in school, but I want you to stay after school and do more? How did you manage to do that? Because a lot of students are going to say, you know what, you're out of your mind. I'm going home. I got other stuff to do.
So just to make a point of clarification, the story Spare Parts is about a combination of two teachers, myself and Alan Cameron. So there's that mixture. But as far as what I was going through, the way I found to get the kids excited was to, at first, you start small. You say, let's maybe do a science fair project, and maybe you get one or two kids that are kind of the nerdy kids that are interested. And the idea was that if other students see activity going on, that they might get curious and may want to join. So one of the tricks was to try to find science fair projects that were interesting, that would catch the attention of the other kids. Even if it wasn't enough to make them join, it was enough to make them pay attention. So the next year, maybe, that if whatever we're doing, they would jump in. What really caught kids' attention were the field trips. So, we would arrange a field trip, and one of the field trips was to go to the Solar and Electric 500, which was an solar and electric car race. And so the kids, it didn't seem like they really, at least in the area I was there, that they were being taken to events like that. So they were totally, what's the word, surprised or excited that there was such a thing as a car that can drive by the power of the sun.
Right.
And that they had the electric cars that were going faster that you can recharge by plugging them in the wall. So that kind of got their interest. And one of the other projects we did that got a lot of people interest, sometimes it's the weirdest things you don't think are going to be very exciting, but it turns out that some of the, what I would consider the most stupid and mundane things, are the things the students are interested in the most. So around Halloween time, we used to build these catapults that would
Okay.
launch pumpkins.
Right.
And, out of all the YouTube videos that we loaded up, even to this day, those videos have the most hits, and they have the most, I'd say, lack of educational value compared to the other stuff that we have up there. But because you're using gravity to throw pumpkins and watching them smash, for some reason, that was very exciting. So it's that kind of atmosphere that you start to build around. The other thing is, kids like to work. I noticed right away, especially when we were doing the science fair, it was hard to get them to do stuff. but they like to work in teams or in
Oh,
groups. So
okay.
being a part of something bigger than themselves takes the pressure off of them, and it also lets them participate in a project that they probably couldn't do without the help of other students.
Right,
So when they
right,
were
right.
done, like, making a catapult that is 20 feet tall and can have a 400-pound counterweight, that's something to throw a pumpkin almost the length of a football field. That's something that no kid could ever do on their own.
Right,
So
right,
so that's what attracted a lot of people initially to these after school antics that we were doing.
right. Off of that, off of that era when you first started doing the whole science fair and the catapults with the pumpkin throwing catapults, what's your fondest memory up to this point off of that time?
You know, it's there's been so many. It's hard to tell you exactly which one, but I can tell you the type of memory.
Okay.
And it's when you see the kids come up with the solution that you yourself didn't even think of.
Mm,
And on the face of it, it's like, wow, that was so simple. Why didn't we think of that
right,
sooner? I
right.
think that the aha moment
Mhm.
is what I enjoy. I mean, it happened with the electric car program, it happened with robotics, it happened with the underwater robot. It's when you see the kids get it and then they can see how it can relate to them and how it can affect their future. Um, and then the other one I'd have to say, it's a close second, is when kids come back years later and they tell you how much it changed their lives being involved in these kinds of activities. What did it
Mm.
do? Now, whether or not it actually did, that's hard to say. They just may have fond memories, but nevertheless, when they tell you about it, it still feels good.
Well, I think to a certain degree they are right because there's got to be a point and a catalyst, and you, as a teacher, planted the seed. And I tell this to my own kids, my 13 and 11-year-old. I say, what I'm telling you now, I won't see the fruits of it until
Mhm.
years later. So it's what I also tell young professionals. What you do now, it's you're sowing stuff at this point which you'll reap the fruits and benefits of it later in a couple of years. So don't expect rewards right away. To a certain extent you got to be patient. So that's essentially what I'm preaching, and that's essentially what you're
Yeah,
teaching those kids. So
yeah, delayed gratification.
exactly, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. And then you started then back in 2004.
Mhm.
This is when it gets to the movie portion where you have a group of four students that are shown in that movie. There
Mhm.
might have been more in real life, but at the same time, there's some reality there where you had a group of students, mixed immigrants and legal citizens and undocumented students. How was that, and how did that happen?
Well, at the time, it wasn't an issue.
Hmm.
Ever since I started working at Carl Hayden, it was common knowledge that there
Hmm.
were undocumented students, and we didn't know which one was which.
Hmm.
It's not like they have a label or anything on them.
Right.
They're students, and they need to be taught, and that's your job as a teacher. So it's something we never really gave thought to. It wasn't until the media started paying attention after the success, a year later after the
Hmm.
success, that all of a sudden the status of the students was starting to be in question. I mean,
Mm.
we were getting emails at the school saying, "Why are you helping undocumented kids?" I mean, even when the article was being researched, I
Hmm.
had no clue that they were going to mention that the students were undocumented. It was just a given fact that everyone just lived with. And you got to remember, back in 2004, it was just beginning to be a hot button issue. It wasn't really as on fire as it is today.
Hmm.
So it was at the early stages of that, and it turns out, and we don't know if this is true, but it felt like it, that anytime we got media in Arizona, that it seemed like the state legislature would then pass some kind of new law or regulation that made it harder for undocumented students. And we almost felt like it was a direct response to the fact that we were showing that students were having success regardless of their immigration status.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so it opened up their eyes, so to speak, and they thought, well, we better stop this as soon as we can.
Hmm.
And our students kept finding ways to go to college, whether it was through special scholarships designated for undocumented students or however it was. Because the bottom line was, and this is what we told the students, it doesn't, it's not a matter of if you get uh, the deported. The question is, what do you want to be deported as?
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you're here, what kind of education can you get? Because I mean, if you get a medical degree or an engineering degree, you can practice anywhere in the world except the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States is not the only place in the world. And it
Mm-hmm.
would be our loss if they don't find a way to allow you to stay in the United States. So as a teacher, that was our major focus,
Right.
was that regardless of your situation, even if you have to raise more funds, even if you have to spend more time trying to find a way to go to college, that's something nobody can take away from you.
Right.
And if you
Correct.
can get that, you've set up your life in a way that most people around the world would envy.
Mm-hmm. That is correct. So now, it's the legal status is a hot button, as you said right now.
Mhm.
But at that time, you're in the school, you guys are working as a team, et cetera, et cetera. But then somehow it gets real and you have to cross state lines.
Mhm.
And you as a teacher, yeah, and this is where I'm going with that, because
Uh-huh.
I too had that when I was growing up. As kids, even as students, we knew that most of us were in that same boat,
Mhm.
and nobody ever spoke about it. It was a unspoken situation, but
Mhm.
you all assumed that that's the way it was, and we all understood each other.
Mhm.
So I'm reflecting back. You're a teacher at that point, right?
Mhm.
So you have a job, and your task, or you're volunteering to drive a bunch of students where you are not sure about their legal status. You know that you have to cross border lines.
Mhm.
And for those who are watching, border lines in Southern California, in the western side of the United States, wherever you cross, there's INS or immigration checkpoint.
Mhm.
And so at that point, did you consider the repercussions of what you were just about to do? Was that even crossing your mind? And
Mhm.
how did you make that choice?
So we learned early on, and I don't know if it was necessarily during that particular trip or any other trip, but that, um, like you said, everyone knew it. So we would tell the students not to bring any other ID other than their school ID,
Mm,
and to make sure, following the law, that it's a government issued ID. If it has an address like the Carl Hayden High School, Phoenix, Arizona, 3333 West Roosevelt.
mm-hmm,
And if they were ever questioned, say, show your ID, that's the only ID they could show. So that's one. And then two, being in a school van, chances are at that time, I don't know so much nowadays because now I'm not doing that, but at the time, if you're a school van or if it's a charter bus, for that example, and it's a school team, they're not going to go and check the status. They have no way of checking the status of each kid.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So they can decide to hold everybody and then find out they wasted their time, and or just let it go. Now, kids are also seen as innocent, so it's not as intimidating, like you're bringing illegal people over here to do
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how come we kind of just had these basic rules. Just
Okay.
you don't have to speak to anybody if they stop and talk to you. That's your right. Chances are they're not going to stop and talk to you. We've had parents ask us, and even tell us, please bring our kid back. And we're like, well,
Right.
we've
Yes.
never been, we've never lost a kid yet. We can't guarantee we won't. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't want them to go, because we don't know what would happen. And I used to
Right.
even ask the district, what is the policy if one of the kids get detained? Do I have to stay with the kid? I mean, I am technically responsible for the kid. And as you mentioned, and is the case, I was doing this for 20, 30 years. So for 20, 30 years, I was transporting, with my
Students.
knowledge or without my knowledge,
Students. Right.
students that were illegal
Right.
across state lines. So
Right.
I've been breaking federal law uh, my whole teaching career,
Right.
and there was just no way around it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel fortunate that I've never lost a student,
Right.
and so I'm glad I quit while I was ahead, so to
Right.
speak.
Right. Well,
But I don't
it's
envy that situation. But
right.
typically, if you're a school function, they usually don't, especially if it's a bigger trip like a charter bus. They never really check the individual status because it would be a waste of time.
Right.
However, given the current situation and the current government, that is a real possibility.
Right. Right. Yeah. And the question was just to see what your mindset was at that time when you first did it, and how you actually felt, if you were nervous or if
A
anything
little,
crossed your mind. Okay, all right.
a little, but it was in the back of our mind.
Okay, okay, fantastic. And so, you were going to that Santa Barbara competition,
Mhm,
and you had registered to enter in competition with heavy hitters like MIT, Cornell,
mhm.
Harvard. What prompted you as the teacher to actually register a high school to go up against college students?
So we wanted to learn as much as we could from this
Okay.
endeavor. And we've learned by this time that we learn the most when we fail. And so we kind of put two and two together. Well, if we want to learn how to do this competition, within a year to be competitive, we got to fail more. So we thought, where would we fail the most? In other words, where would we have the most opportunity to learn? Would it be against other high school students that may have the same level of abilities, or would it be against university kids? So we thought, for sure, if we enter in the university category, that they're going to obliterate us. But that wasn't the reason. The
Mhm.
reason was we were going to go there, and it was a week-long competition. We'd have the students with notepads, ask the different teams what components they put on their robot, what strategies were they using, whatever questions they can come up with. And then the plan was to, meet in the hotel room in the evening and then put up these notes and put them into categories. So one would be the things that we can do within a year and the things that would take, longer or that we
Mm,
can't do. The
okay.
idea to help us focus, what can we do to come back to be more competitive? So
Right.
for us, it was an experiment. We had no intention of actually competing. Now, having said that, we didn't want to be embarrassed, so we did the best we could.
Right.
That our hope was that we would finish ahead of just one team. I mean, that
Right.
was kind of what we were looking for.
When you register the team, how much time did you actually have leading up to the competition to complete the robot and get ready for
So
it?
registration is sometime, I think, in late September,
Okay.
October, and you have until June the next year
Okay.
to compete. So we had quite a bit of time.
Okay. Okay. And then a couple, based on the movie and based on what I know about competition, there's trial and error. There's revisions to your design.
Mhm.
So how did that evolve within your team? And what was the frustration like within the team?
So you said it exactly right. For us, we'd never built an underwater robot. So
Mhm.
the idea of putting electronics in water just seemed kind of scary.
Yeah.
But we used trial and error. We'd make little experiments for things to do in the classroom. And I happened to be the marine science teacher as well. So I had lots of fish tanks. So
Okay.
we were able to test stuff in the water. Some of the things were, we call experts supposedly and say, well, we want to use this RS-232 cable for a tether for a robot. And they go, that's no problem. People use 6-foot tethers all the time. I say, well, we want to make ours 50 feet. And they'd say, well, we don't know if the signals will travel that far. So
Mhm.
instead of letting that stop us, we said, okay, we're going to get as many of these 6 feet cables and plug them together and then see if we can control a robot from 50 feet away. So we didn't just take the thought of the day, or what's the word called,
Mhm.
the science of the day to
Right.
dictate whether we could or couldn't do something. We
Yeah.
wanted to find out for
Right.
ourselves.
You did
And
trial and error type of thing.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Right.
so we were able to control a robot. Now, the one area that was a little iffy was the video image that we would get from 50 feet, where the video cables are traveling right next to these signals, was not the best video.
Hmm.
But was it adequate enough to drive a robot? Yes.
Mm.
So we figured that's going to be our tether, because the main thing that separated us, and we didn't know this at the time, was that we had our batteries on board the robot.
Okay.
Because we didn't know in the real world, you don't do that, because if you send a robot to the bottom of the ocean, you don't want to take 4 hours to go down, then it runs for an hour, and you got to take 4 hours to pull it back up and then change the battery. You put your batteries on the surface.
Right.
So you have to run a totally different electrical scheme, which would mean heavier cables, more wire, all that stuff. We just wanted to be able to control a robot, so we figured, well, it doesn't make any sense to put your batteries on the surface, because then you have to have all these extra heavy wires
Hmm.
going down to the robot.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so we just figured, no, we want, because low voltage signals that don't have a lot of current can travel 50 feet.
Right.
High current, even if you travel 10 feet, you can lose the power of your motors, so that you'd have to have 5 times as much voltage on the surface to get that voltage to travel the length of wire. So it
Right.
was a complication we did not want to add to the
Right.
robot.
Exactly.
And it
And more
turned out
cost and more, right?
that
Yep.
gave us the huge advantage, but that was just trial and error.
Right. And then you mentioned huge advantage, and you obviously go into the competition and you start seeing that colleges are kind of dropping off and you're moving ahead, et cetera, et cetera. And then it gets down to the judges asking the verbal questions to the students.
Mhm.
You obviously mentioned before
Mhm.
in other conversations that some students were not well STEM inclined per se, but they also, being part of the team, had to understand how the whole robot actually worked and be able to explain it in layman's terms. So
Mhm.
how was that approach taken by you? Was it something that you helped the students, or was it something that the team itself helped the other members of the team to actually cope and practice and rehearse certain
Mhm.
responses, or
Mhm.
how did that go?
So the 4 kids, because there's just sometimes people get confused with the movie because Hollywood
Hmm.
does its own version, but the 4
Right,
kids all were involved in building the robot.
right,
So it wasn't that they didn't know how to explain it.
right.
Where they may have lacked a little bit of information was the actual terminology that might be used.
Hmm.
And so we would help polish their presentation.
Hmm.
But also, the other thing we knew was, and we just knew this just from being teachers, that there was no way that our students were going to know more than the students at these universities.
Hmm.
So we looked at the rubric that the judges would give out for the type of things that would be in your report, and we knew that the questions were going to derive from the report that was submitted. So we pretty much stuck closely to what the rubric was. The rubric would say, what problems did you encounter in building this robot? And then how did you overcome those problems? So
Hmm.
we figured these aren't difficult questions. These are questions that we actually can answer. And so we focused on the kids to just talk about the stuff you know. Don't talk about the stuff you don't know. There's no way you can.
Right.
And if the judges ask you something that you don't know, just say, "Sir, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that. I don't understand that," and just go from there.
Right.
And we were hoping that that would be the right approach. But nevertheless, they did practice. It was a matter of polish, so they stopped saying the uhs all the time, like and
Mm.
maybe someone's doing fidgety stuff. It's the little presentation things that we kind of honed in and made them practice. And then at the competition, prior to the actual presentation, we told them to just go out into around campus and stop a student or two and ask them if you can explain your robot to them. And they kind of laughed at it. People will listen to us. They go, well, they're students. They'll be nice. They'll just listen to you and see what you say. And
Hmm.
they ended up liking it. And they said the students actually asked them questions.
Wow.
So they
Okay.
actually you can't call it cold crank, cold presented to
Okay.
a random kid just walking by on
Hmm.
campus. And I think that helped them a lot.
Okay. You built up their confidence by doing that exercise, and you put more repetition in the way
Yeah.
that they present it. That's awesome. That's incredible. So that confidence kind of built up, and it went on. So, the movie actually shows something about there's a leak going into the actual box of
Mhm.
the robot itself, where all the
Mhm.
circuitry is. That is real, from what I
Yes.
understand. That is true. And then there's a scene there where there's a student comes up with the idea of a tampon. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
So the actual story. So the day
Yes.
before, we had a practice session, and we
Yeah.
were driving the robot, and it wasn't operating correctly. So we pulled it over, and it had been in maybe only 5 minutes. And we opened up the lid of the electronics housing and noticed there was a little bit of water. But we also noticed a few wires had been disconnected that were previously soldered. And that may have happened in the journey from Arizona to California. The sun was probably hitting the robot. Maybe it got too hot. Maybe the jiggling did it, whatever.
Hmm.
We knew we had to solder the wires, and we needed to go to several stores to buy some thin solder and a solder gun because we just didn't think that was going to happen. So we had to do that. The other problem was the housing that the electronics was in, where the watertight seal was a slight deformation or indentation that
Hmm.
may have been caused by someone who was working on the robot and touched the solder gun to the plastic.
Mm.
It had a slight deformation. So it wasn't like water was pouring in like crazy, but over a 30-minute period of time, that would be an issue. So we were trying to find dinner, driving around in Santa Barbara with the school van. And Alan Cameron mentioned that diapers have this material called desiccant. It's a powder that goes between the layers of the fabric so it can absorb more liquid so the diaper doesn't leak. And I mentioned how, yeah, when we used to do electric vehicles, I knew a teacher at another school made their students go buy maxi pads so they would absorb the sulfuric acid that might leak out from the batteries. And you didn't want the 96 volts from the batteries touching the chassis because your 12-volt lights and radio and everything else is connected, but you don't want to burn those out. So the maxi pads would absorb any sweating, as they called it, of the batteries. But again, that was also too large. But Christian had sisters, and he brought up the idea of tampons because I guess he had, I don't necessarily think experience, but exposure to tampons. And so he kind of knew the dimensions and how it could be used. And we didn't have any clue, but we agreed that it sounded like the most logical choice. So then we decided, by everybody insisting that everyone else would go get the tampons, we all finally agreed that Lorenzo, he's kind of the joker of the group, that he would be the best person to go get the tampons. And he agreed to take one for the team. And so we told him, you're going to wait in the feminine hygiene aisle in the store. And then as soon as a woman comes by, you can get one shot. You have to say, "Hi, my name is Lorenzo, and we have this robot that's underwater, and it has a leak, and we're in a competition, and we want to stop the leak, but we don't know which tampon to use. Could you help me?" So we don't know if he said it. He claims he said verbatim what we told him. And he said at first the woman was scared, but then she couldn't stop laughing. And so you can see these two minds, someone who knows about tampons and someone who knows about our needs, but they don't know each other. And so they have to work together to get to this solution. And they come up with the OB tampons because they were the smallest and you didn't need an applicator. And Lorenzo didn't want to ask what that was, but he figured if it was, you didn't need it, that's a good thing. And so we ended up strategically, placing these in the robot. We even tested them in the hotel room because we're scientists. We're curious. How much water does one tampon hold? So we figured a one tampon holds about 3 ounces of water, 4 ounces of water within about a second. So we figured, okay, these are great. And we put them all over the robot we knew the robot was going to leak. We knew some of the tampons or all the tampons would fill up with water, but we were pretty confident that the water wouldn't slosh around and short circuit stuff. And it did exactly what it was supposed to do.
Yes, for sure. It's fantastic. That's an awesome story, and that's why I wanted you to tell it, because it's a crazy story, but it's the quirky adventures that one goes through and the camaraderie that gets built off of those experiences stays in your mind for a very, very long time, and it builds those strong bonds in a team. And I think that's what actual live competitions make. And now we've pivoted to more of a virtual situation where students, robotics competitions, at least in California, I don't know if in Arizona, are still happening and gathering. And you are working with an organization called Si Se Puede, and you are the vice president of STEM initiatives. How did that happen?
So after working in the public education system for 30 years, I decided I wanted a change of lifestyle as well, to be able to spend a little more time at home and not be gone so many hours, because being a teacher and then having basically a full-time job after school was enough for 30 years. But I did want to stay in education in a way where I could utilize the expertise that I gained over my career. So I met Alberto Esparza and expressed my interest to wanting to work for the organization. And at that time, I was mostly thinking at the collegiate level. It wasn't necessarily gender-based. It was just robotics team at the college level, because so many kids that go through all these high school programs go to college and then they feel disillusioned because now it's just book learning test. And so there was no hook to keep them engaged in college. And those kind of projects don't come until you're grad students and that type of thing. And so I wanted to create the same kind of magnet that caused the students to stay engaged in high school at the college level, so kids could graduate, go to college, and still stay in engineering and not give up on it before they had a chance to get their degree. And then when I was doing research on my last year of teaching, I bumped into some reports that were talking about the statistics of women in engineering. And the mission of Si Se Puede is to serve underserved populations. And so I thought, well, women in engineering is definitely an underserved population. There's not enough women. There's not enough resources to help women get in. So I thought, I do like challenges. So I thought this, I got nothing to lose. Let's see if we can create a women's team and get them to be competitive. Because in my mind, in order to help the experience that I gained, a group of students that don't think they can do anything, the best way to get them confidence is to show them that they can do anything. And so the idea was to take that same model that I practiced and honed in high school and put it to work at the collegiate level with a group of women to see if they could get competitive. And then on multiple fronts, we wanted to also see if women, men, other teams, because it's predominantly male, would stop thinking of the team so much as a women's team, but rather as a team they might lose to. Because if that's the thought in their mind, we kind of broke the stereotype that they may still think we're a women's team, but they're also thinking, how do they not lose to us? And I think that's a shift that's important.
Yes.
And so that's what I've been doing the last 2 years with the Cisa Puede Foundation. I'm going to jump in because it's very important to say this, that in our first year, we were hoping for a 3-year plan, but in our first year, the team ended up placing 3rd in the world. There were 50 teams from over 12 countries. We were the first American team in our first year of competition. And this past summer, because of the COVID situation, the in-person portion of the competition wasn't there, but everything else still was. So the report, the website, the stuff that you have to turn into the judges, all that stuff. We ended up this year finishing 2nd in the world. So we are having success. It is making a difference, but we're not going to be happy until we win first. And so that's our goal. So hopefully next year, COVID will be under control enough for us to compete in person. And that would be our pièce de résistance, to show that a women's team could do anything a male team could do. Winning first place is our goal.
How's the motivation with the young female students at this point with the virtual environment? And for that fact, for any of the other students, but mainly for the WAVE team that you're leading?
Yeah. Well, I should say, too, that the team is called Desert WAVE, and WAVE is an acronym. It stands for Women in Autonomous Vehicle Engineering. And it was a rough this year. We lost some members because just the inability to meet in person takes its toll, and then other responsibilities come up, and that takes its toll. We did manage to work out a situation where when we needed to work on stuff, I converted my garage into a workshop. We'd have one student come who was obviously, they had to be COVID free for 14 days. They'd wear a mask, I'd wear a mask, we'd wipe everything down. We'd work for no more than 3 hours at a time. As soon as they were done, I wipe everything down, they go home. And so we kept the contact to a minimum. The high school teams, it's harder all across Arizona because just like you said, in California, they're competing, but in Arizona, we can't compete. There's been no competition. So we're kind of in limbo right now. So my job in that area is a little bit different. So we're taking a different take. We're going to a smaller size robot that could be moved from one student's house to another. So the high school kids can compete in a competition. How the actual competition will look like, we won't know because it's several months away. Could be an in-person with a small number of people, or it might be they videotape their robot's performance and send that in, and then they'll be judged that way. So we're trying to adapt as much as possible because the other option is dying, and we don't want to die. So whatever we have to do to adapt to stay in the game, we're going to do.
Right. And I want to focus on something you mentioned. You lost a couple members at the collegiate level, and I don't know if this has to do with the fact that some of the students have to work, they have other responsibilities. You mentioned other responsibilities, and I'm assuming because they're at a low income area, their parents might be financially struggling. So the kids might actually have to step in and say, I'm also going to be financially supporting in some sort of way or form or shape, or taking care of the siblings that are now being educated, homeschooled to a certain extent, and the parents go off to work, whereas the students might do virtual classes from college, and at the same time, they handle the situation of being the nanny at home. So that might be part of it. I don't know what the real issue is, but it's frustrating with this whole COVID-19, but I'm glad to see that you're pivoting and adjusting as best you can as a whole team. And in a phrase or two, what attracted you to join as the VP of Si Se Puede?
Well, when I was joining, I wasn't necessarily applying for a VP position. That's something that Alberto decided to present to me. I was looking for just the ability to be able to form a collegiate team and to try to achieve this goal. And I knew that, from years of knowing Alberto and his organization, that I wanted to be associated with the type of programs that he was doing because I felt it was important. And he offered the avenue by which I wanted to try something new. So it was a mutual meeting that turned out to be perfect. So I can't say I knew exactly what I was trying to get when I approached him, but I had the basic ballpark. And so the VP is just another aspect of that. If I wasn't VP, I'd be just as happy.
Awesome. So at this point, are you still a teacher at the Carl Hayden High School so how is that time managed?
I'm not.
No, you're not. Okay,
No,
you're not.
I retired from public education.
Okay, you retired. Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make that clear because I kind of got a little lost there. So
Yeah.
you're also a mentor. You're a mentor to many students that are in your team, but you're a mentor to so many other students that are not part of your team just by looking at what you've done, and they somehow get a spark and start, dreaming bigger. So how does that make you feel? And you mentioned something that you get that responsibility without really asking for that responsibility. So how are you dealing with it, and how has your perception changed?
So there's a story that goes along with that, and that's that when the 4Kids story in Wired magazine got well known, Wired invited us to, I guess, a conference, if you want to call it that, where they showcased all the different exhibits that were there that used to be in Wired magazine throughout the year. And so they had the robot Stinky there and us the 4 students and the 2 teachers. And we were just supposed to talk to the public as they came by. And some people came specifically to see the certain things that they saw in Wired magazine. Well, this one Latina, was walking with a student, a child, and with each hand, held tightly. And, without looking at anything else, without looking like they were wandering, it's as if they knew we were exactly there and walked directly to us. And so at first I thought, here's a mother coming to ask us for help, because we were probably the most different ethnically in the area.
Most diverse team.
And so I thought maybe we were the most approachable, for some reason.
Okay.
And that maybe she had a question about a 3rd kid she lost or something. She looked very serious. There was no joy, no looking around. It was focused.
She was honed into you guys. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And she came right up to us and she looked right at me and she said, I wanted my undocumented sons to see what your 4 undocumented students have done. Thank you for helping my people. And what do you say to that? I mean, first of all, I didn't even know that was going to be the question. And even if I did, what could you possibly say? So it kind of just left us, gasping for what do you say? After she left, she spent about 20 minutes talking to the kids, and her kids were asking questions, and then they left. And then I sat down with Lorenzo and I said, Lorenzo, you can't pick your nose in public anymore. And he goes, what does that mean? I said, well, you're a role model. People are watching what you do. People are watching what I do.
Yes.
And he goes, well, I don't want to be a role model. I said, well, it's too late. You're already in the magazine. Everyone knows about you. They're all going to want to know what happens next. If you do something, someone might recognize you and say, oh, this is one of those kids. Look how bad he did, or look how good he did. So he didn't like that. And at the same time, I realized, well, now when I go to teacher staff meetings, I can't be the one hiding in the corner and stay quiet, because people are going to expect me to say stuff. But I don't want to be the one that says everything thinking I know everything. So it comes down to, I always have to look at, what would the teacher do? What's the right thing to do? If I'm supposed to speak up, not speak up. So in a way, you have the choice, like I told Lorenzo. You could live up to the expectations people have of you, or you can let everybody down. There's the only 2 choices I can see. So trying to live up to it, I think helps make you a better person, because sometimes you wonder, "Well, do I really want to do that? I don't want to do that. If I do that and I get caught, then I'm being on the news, and then people are going to say, so you think of all these things that run through your mind. Not that you wouldn't be a good person anyway, but it becomes more important to
Mm-hmm.
make sure you don't do the wrong thing. So
Right.
being a role model that way is okay. But I have to tell you, one of the things that's been really pleasurable since the movie has come out is that I've got to do a lot of public speaking, and I've gone to a lot of places where there are educators.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stories that I hear educators say about how I've impacted how they approach education, I think is also very rewarding. So if I can keep sharing the story of how I had success, not that I have the secret formula, because there's many roads to success, maybe it will trigger or inspire others to do the same thing.
Right.
And so as long as I can do that, I feel like I have a value. It feels good.
Right. You know, and I mentioned, and thank you for sharing that. I mentioned role models because sometimes my perception is students see people on television, people on magazines that do not look like them, doing jobs that they don't see themselves doing. But when they see people like them doing jobs that they themselves think can't be done, you break that stereotype in their mind and that barrier, and you get them that much closer, and you limit them or break their crutch of an
Mhm,
excuse to move forward, which is what you did with Lorenzo, saying,
mhm,
now you're a role model. People are looking up to you and myself, and you and yourself at that point, at that conversation, as to, this can be done regardless of your legal status, regardless of your gender, regardless of your culture. If you
mhm.
put your mind to it, you can achieve it. So I'm assuming that when this happens, a lot of students think, I can really do this, and they start
Yeah.
believing on themselves, and they start moving forward to that goal, and
Mhm,
they achieve it, because
mhm.
you put one step in front of the other, you eventually will get somewhere. It might take you 5, 6, 10, 20 years, but if you have that mindset, you're not limited anymore. So thank you for being that role model, not only to the students that you touch, but also to so many others that probably watch you, that probably have watched the movie and like, oh my God, this person, he's been able to do this. And you break that barrier in their mind. So that's awesome. What
Well, thank
is
you.
the most surprising thing that has come out of all of this? It's been, 16 years since that first competition. And I know almost for the first full year, you didn't get any media attention. But then after that, it kind of snowballed, and you started, oh my God, what's going on? What has been the most surprising thing that you can reflect back and see?
I think the idea that anybody can do anything they want to do. It's a thing I always believed, but it's more so evident when you can get other people to not only believe it but enact it. And so that's surprising, because sometimes you think, well, how do you pass your passion on to someone else? How do you get them to get excited? How do you get them to commit the time? So that's always, to me, been kind of magical. Sometimes it works. I've had some kids that no matter what I say have had no effect.
Mhm.
And so I can't say it's just something I'm doing. I think it's a combination of chemistry, the condition the students in, where they're at, their part of the life, what stresses are put upon them. So that's a combination, but it's always magical when you do make that connection. The other thing that's interesting is that despite the success, you can still see so much need out there in so many communities where there needs to be more success.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of a combination of, in both directions. I just saw a trailer today for the new movie that John Leguizamo is doing about the teacher that taught these kids how to play chess, and I guess in the inner city somewhere, and then become national chess champions. So there needs to be more stories like this, and about all groups.
Mhm.
But those kind of stories are what I looked up to when I was a kid, and I think the more positive examples we have. I mean, the superhero movies are great, but no one's going to be, Tony Stark or Aquaman or whatever.
Right.
But it's nice to see that. But the real people,
Mhm.
the the real things that the astronauts had to do when they went to the moon for the first time, and all the different things they had to experience. The astronauts or the aerospace engineers that are designing rockets that can land by themselves now and getting ready to go to Mars. I mean, cars that drive by themselves. We live in a very exciting time,
Right.
and we need role models of people
Yes.
that are doing these things so that other people can see all these opportunities are out there and you can get it. It's up for grabs. It's not just for one kind of person. So when you ask me what's the most exciting thing, I think it's the combination. Seeing the effect you can have, but then also realizing that there's so much more. But the biggest thing is that all those things are open for anyone who has the mind to put their mind to it.
Anyone who has their mind to put their mind to it. That's awesome. That's incredible. Well, you know, what are the next steps for Fredi Lajvardi? You are the BEP of Si Se Puede. You are a strong, long-lasting record of teaching STEM to students. You know, you are a speaker at this point, talking to different institutions and audiences. You are a very successful individual. But what is next for you at this point?
Well, just like I try to tell people, you have to break things down
Mm-hmm.
one step at a time. I think right now my immediate goal will be to see the women's team win the international competition,
Awesome.
because then anybody who has an argument against women will lose that argument.
Okay.
And so I want that. Second thing is I want to live long enough to see people land on Mars.
Oh, that's awesome.
So if I die after those two things, I'll be sort of okay.
Okay. What's okay? You'll be sort of okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So we all have, we all have mentors that we look up to. And do you have any mentors that you can mention? I know that you, on our beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that teacher at ASU that kind of pushed you towards being a teaching education individual.
Mhm.
But is there any mentors other than that person, or can you share with us?
So initially, that was my high school science teacher.
Okay.
Her name was Ann Justice. So she was the first one. But since then, the ability, I should say, the inability for me to be able to execute some of these STEM fields requires me to reach out into the industry and find people that have the skills that also can work with us. And so some of the people I look up to are those mentors that I help pull in to work with the teams, because I learn a lot from them. Believe it or not, also some of them are students. One in particular is Oscar Vasquez. He was the one of the four boys. He's the leader of the four boys, and the things that he has had to go through in his life, and looking at how he had the ability to stay focused and accomplish those tasks despite odds that I think I would have given up on. To me, that's inspiring. It's I don't know if it's rare, but I think it's very unusual to find mentors that are younger than you.
Mm-hmm.
And in one way, I would say that in some respects, he's a mentor. So I don't know if there's any one particular one. I mean, I just get my inspiration from wherever I see it. If I see Elon Musk, I mean, he may not be a perfect person. He may have stuff that's wrong with him, but in the big picture of things, what he's trying to do is phenomenal.
Right.
The idea that a person can own his own car company and then own his own space company and then put his car into space, his own car, that boggles the imagination. Name another person that can
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
There
Right.
is none.
Yeah. There is very, yeah, he's the one and only at this point. Exactly. And he's so nonchalant about it. He doesn't flaunt it to a certain extent, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure he knows
Yeah.
he's a big influence on a lot of
So I
people.
think I get my influences from wherever I feel the passion. And so I don't know if there's one person.
Awesome.
I
Awesome.
I do know, and I this is kind of a little bit of a sad thing, but Carl Sagan, when I was growing up, he used to do this series called Cosmos,
Okay.
and he really opened up the world of science in a easy to understand way. And one of the speeches he gave, and one of his little portions of his videos, was
Right.
a speech called "The Pale Blue Dot."
Okay.
That speech puts humanity in perspective in a way that I think most people don't look at humanity. And when
Pale
you
blue
see
dot.
where you are in the universe and what your role is, I think it helps center what you should be focused on. And I think that's probably one of the best speeches. If I had to pick a speech that really puts you in your place in the universe, that's it.
Right. And Carl is the mentor, or was a mentor, to Bill Nye, the science guy. So this is pre-Bill Nye, the science guy. And I think what you're referring to as the pale blue dot, you're referring to the Earth being so small in this vast universe. And we are essentially insignificant to feel so important that we pretty much want to destroy everything with whatever we do, and we're not being conscientious about the way we act, or the way we act towards each other first, national unrest at this point, and then the way we treat our planet and the environment. And so we should be humbled by being alive and so honored to be part of this, that we should take care of everything we do. And I know this is a podcast based, more focused on STEM, and we talk more on STEM, but the planet is part of our home. So we should take care of it, period.
Well, and I think something that, and this I believe wholeheartedly, especially in education, that one of the things that's missing in STEM education and education in general is inspiration and passion. And, I think that it's one of the most underrated qualities that need to be developed in high school. I think, and even in college, I think that those two things are underrated, even in, technology and STEM. When you think of people who've done incredible things, so many times you don't know the agony they went through to get to that point. I remember last summer, not this summer, just a year ago, there was a woman who she was able to come up with a mathematical algorithm to separate all the noise from the telescopes to be able to show people using computer simulation what a black hole looks like. That took 10 years. What inspires or motivates someone to spend 10 years of their life to do that? And can you imagine, and we saw the picture on Facebook of her face when she became the first human in history to see what a black hole would look like.
Right.
And so that's amazing.
Yeah.
And in anything you do, I mean, I used an analogy one time just to make a point, because it's easier for people to relate to sports analogies, that, when people were trying to break the 4-minute mile, it was thought to be impossible. That if you did it, your lungs would explode or your legs would fall off or whatever. It was an impossibility. And at that time, obviously, no internet, no TV, you barely had radio and newspaper. Just imagine people back then, when someone was announcing they were going to try to break a 4-minute mile, and two people were within 2 or 3 seconds of doing that. And this took many years to do. When they announced they were doing a race, 400,000 people showed up to watch. That just blows your mind. Because they wanted to be
social media.
They either wanted to see someone explode, or they wanted to see someone break the world record that everyone said was impossible.
Right. Yeah, that's
what
crazy.
Motivates people to do these things.
Yeah.
Same thing could be for STEM, when you want to make the first rocket to land by itself. You name it. So to me, I think that is the biggest thing that I think that education could really help develop, is how do you get people to follow their passion in these fields so that they can achieve these things? Because, Elon Musk had 7 businesses fail before he found PayPal.
Right. Yeah. Even at this time, space travel had been dormant for almost a decade, or more than a decade. And all of a sudden, with the Dragon going up and taking 2 American astronauts, launching from American soil to go to the ISS, a lot more people watched than they've watched in a very long time any space mission. Yeah. And that's because they wanted to see somebody succeed. And that's because the imagination exploded. And I'm pretty sure a lot of students and a lot of young individuals now are saying, I want to be an astronaut, and the next target is not the moon. The next target is Mars. I want to be able to go to Mars. When I was a kid, obviously, there was a lot of aircraft shuttle missions that would go up and down, and I would watch them. And I had the dream of becoming an astronaut at some point. The closest I got, it was mechanical engineering, but that's close enough for me. but at the same time, people and young individuals need that passion, that fuel to continue moving forward. And if those sort of things, positive things, can fuel people and students to move forward as a unity and nation, that's amazing. That's I can applaud to that. That's incredible. Thank you so much. Next couple questions are really fast. What do you believe your superpower to be? If you don't have one, which superpower would you select, and why would you select that superpower?
I think my superpower is being able to pull in people to projects to help them have them help the students. I think that's a superpower. My ability to connect with people, I think, is a superpower.
That's awesome. Ability to connect with people. That's awesome. Is there any book, any movie or podcast that you believe has made an impact in your life and you wish more people would take advantage of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many movies. Hidden Figures is a good one.
Yes.
The Right Stuff is a long movie. That's a good one. There are series too that do that. Just, any movie that can be inspirational. I mean, October Sky is another one that I think for our high school kids is a great thing.
Right.
It basically demonstrates that your education is a way out, the way out of all the trouble that you're in. You don't have to be a football star.
Right.
So exactly. I think stories like that are movies I think that are inspirational.
Right. Awesome. Or Freedom Riders, and I like that movie. Yep. Or Stand and Deliver.
Stand and Deliver, or Spare Part.
Spare Part. Obviously, that's kind of what I was hinting at. I thought you were going to say that, but never. What is your definition of success? I know that everybody has a definition of success at various points in your life, but right now, for Fredi, what is your definition of success at a personal level?
Hang on one second.
Sure.
Definition of success is if you've done everything you can do and you've been the best, and if you can even go beyond what you thought you can do, I think that's the definition of success. I think when you don't do your best, when you don't try hard, when you undersell yourself, I think that's when you don't live up to your full potential. As human beings, you have the ability, and this is what separates us from all the animals. We can imagine something and then make that something true. Mm-hmm. I don't know if any other animal has the capability to do it on the level that we can. Mm. So, even though we went to the moon, in the 60s, mm-hmm. It still boggles my imagination that humans can do something like that. So that's what I think is my definition of success. If you can push the envelope of science and technology and what humans are capable of, whether it's technological or physiological, like someone breaking the world record and running, I think those are the things that would consider success. And if you've done everything you can to be the best you can be, that's success.
That's success. That's awesome.
Whether you win or not.
Awesome. Whether you win or not, yes. And fell fast and fell often, so you can learn off of those failures and continue moving forward. That's incredible. Yep. This last question, I really enjoy asking this last question of every guest that I have on the show. I want you to imagine yourself being able to travel back in time, and see yourself walking off of that classroom frustrated when you were just a young teacher who wanted to change the world and change students, but were frustrated because of several things that kind of lined up. If you could go back now, and it's about 5 or 6 o'clock as you're walking towards your car, and you could just jump out and say, "Hey, Fredi, hold on. I am you from the future, and I have about 2 to 3 minutes. I want to share this 3 pieces of advice." What would you say to that young Fredi?
You better hang on, because it's going to be a wild ride. Okay. Don't give up on your dreams. Okay. Things will find a way to work out. Just keep fighting and never give up.
Awesome. Yes. Keep fighting and never give up. Don't ever give up on your dreams. That's incredible. Thank you so much, Fredi. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being part of a Success Innovation episode. I want to acknowledge you for all the effort that you put in, for everything that you do for the community at large, for the STEM initiatives that you're pushing through the organization of Si Se Puede, for not giving up on your dreams and pushing forward back in 2004, a team of individuals from a low-income high school and allowing them to dream big and to achieve greatness beyond their wildest dreams. Thank you so much for continuing to be
Welcome.
that
Thank you.
inspiring mentor. And with that, I want to say thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. This has been Lázaro Herrera and Fredi. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for finishing another fantastic episode with Success Innovation. Today we learned so much more about Fredi Lajvardi and how he managed to pivot at one point that dissolution that was beginning to weigh him down as an early high school teacher. It is motivating to see individuals so passionate about STEM who are supporting and encouraging the younger generation. Thank you, Fredi Lajvardi, for your time and conversation with me. This has been Lázaro Herrera for Success Innovation. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.